Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Kay. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. Um, Welcome back to another conversation about the tools that
Hmm.
so it's funny because some of them we definitely created. Like the amplifier, that was like that's a past episode. We definitely like that was a we made that one, right? I think anyway. Like there hadn't been an amplifier tool before we talked about it. But a lot of the tools are ones that maybe we're I think the way that I've said it in the past is we when we were doing our work together so so that I could be in training to sort of do this and then actually do this big cross England hike. um you were sort of taking concepts from thousands of years or more old, that were thousands or more years old, and helping me reinterpret them for myself in a way that they worked for me.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good way of saying it, is that, yeah, most of the tools were handed down over the history of humanity. And what I think is helpful is to figure out how to apply them to your own context and your own situation. And I think that's where having somebody who's looking at your context from a different perspective than you are when you're in it, it's helpful to have that external perspective to see which tool from the toolbox might be most helpful in that situation. So yeah, I the amplifier one, I don't even recall where that came from in my own sort of inspiration, but I think all of the tools are tools that basically reflect, the human experience. And I always, we've never really talked about this, but I'm always thinking about how amazing it is that people thousands of years ago sort of had the self-awareness and reflection and ability to document their own experience in a way that has lasted thousands of years of human testing.
Mm.
Um, and the wisdom of those teachers from so long ago. Yeah, yeah. At some point, people just need to get on with accepting there's some wisdom there that if it's lasted through this many generations of human evolution, it might be worth paying some attention to.
Mm.
So thank you for giving me the opportunity to test on you as you were going through your journey. Um, and as we've talked about many times, I think all of these tools are helpful. Like when I'm coaching somebody or when I'm offering support to somebody, it's helping me at the same time, right? It's a reminder about something that also might have relevance in my own context. So I always, and coming back to these now and going back through them again, it's quite interesting because you and I have been on different paths since you finished your hike, and now we're talking about how some of these tools apply to what's happening today. And there's lots happening today for both of us.
Mm.
And it's fun to see that this we can carry this toolbox around with us wherever we go and whatever we're up to.
Hmm. Yes. Um, that has been one of the things, like we sort of jumped into this series with like not a lot of planning, which is I think a great way to do it. We identified something we wanted to bring to people and here we are, right? Um, at the same time, I've really enjoyed kind of watching it evolve from what I thought it was going to be to what it is, which is really quite lively conversations about about how these were helpful then, perhaps. Like I love hearing about, how something came about for you, or what you learned about in your life, and how that, and then how they're helpful for us now. And just like you, I feel like the work of a coach, I love it because it's very symbiotic. There's something really wonderful about like, um, I think I've heard it said like, just go look in the mirror if you want to understand who your clients are. In a
Mhm.
lot of ways, you're able to support, we are able to support someone who has something similar that they wish for themselves and that we've already learned. So,
Mhm.
um, and just thinking about that, the amplifier one came about because you said to me one day, I'm curious about how you amplify, your experience of life. Like, and I was like, what does that even mean? Like, are you saying that I'm loud? And you were like, well, amplification is when you take an input of a certain size and you make it bigger. And so that tool evolved from that kind of from that
Yeah. Yeah.
conversation experience.
It was an observation that there seemed to be a lot more drama than most people that I meet. And
Mm.
so I was just curious how that, where that came from, what the source of that might be, and whether it was as dramatic as being as I was hearing, or whether its original source might have been a smaller amount of drama, but there was something in between that was helping it grow.
Mm.
And so I'm glad it's been a helpful thing, because I think we all, to all the people watching, like, we all have these things that are constantly going on in our lives around us, and what we do with them and how much amplification we give to them can determine how much work it is to just let them be, or get all caught up in them, you know.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's one that I'm constantly being conscious of in my own life, of just making sure that the things that are happening around me are that I'm looking at them with the appropriate amount of um, scale, like that I'm seeing them for what they are, as opposed to trying to amplify them or magnify them into something much bigger than that.
Mm. Mm. Well said. So today, I think it's really funny because I haven't even I would say I haven't even decided yet.
Oh.
We've got we've got three and they're equally compelling. Or really, I think the conversation will be really lively around each of them. And so I think it really feel like, especially taking this conversation about these are tools that people have used for millennia, and I like that they've survived um even throughout all this time, I guess. And I would be curious if the one that I am choosing is like that too. And that is that negative thoughts are opportunities for growth.
Mm.
That was a very interesting tool to learn for me. So yeah, what I guess I'm looking for it in the I'm in my book. So these tools conversations are based on the tools that I've wrote about in my memoir, which is called Waking Up. And the tools that have been useful for me chapter is about all the ways that I learned how to kind of shift my thinking, my mindset over the time that I was training to do this England hike. And so I will read, if that, if that feels good, Andrew, I will read Tool 7, Trusting Evidence Over Thoughts. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. While hiking across northern England, I often found myself in pastures with cows. Frequently, there'd be warnings on gates about staying away from the cows and keeping dogs on leash. The warnings were especially dire in May when I was there because that was calving season. Lots of mama and calf pairs in these fields. Don't challenge them was often the advice. Don't get between a mother and a baby. Stay on the perimeter of the field if you can. Many times I simply couldn't. I couldn't stay on the perimeter of the field. If it was massive and the path went right down the center of it as far as I could see, I couldn't avoid getting between mamas and babies. Gradually, I gained my own understanding of how to be okay in these situations, singing to myself, peaceful cows, peaceful K, as I went through a field at least a quarter mile long and with lots and lots of pairs of moms and calves. Soon after, beginning to notice that the calves were curious and the moms were peaceful. Learning that I could give energy that would allow them to be peaceful. Along with that came the idea that I could trust evidence over thoughts. When I heard and repeated to myself all the dire warnings of the terrible things that could happen, however rarely, those were thoughts. The evidence, as I was with the cows, was of peace and curiosity and enjoyment. My thoughts can mislead me to judge others harshly. Being curious, looking around, and seeing what is true turns out to be useful in lots of situations. It's played out again and again and again in my life since crossing England. One of the most important learnings from the trek. I just realized something. That was not the tool that I thought I was going to be like I said a different tool than I actually read.
You did.
Well, let's which one do you want to go with, Andrew?
Well,
The one
no,
that I
I
read
think,
or the one I said?
yeah, the one that you read sounds you've set it up so nicely. So let's go with that.
Cool. Sounds good. How funny.
Mm.
Yeah. So trusting evidence over thoughts.
It's an interesting title. We were talking about song titles before we started recording, and it if that were a song title, trusting evidence over thoughts.
Mhm.
I think the big shift for me in understanding this one is around understanding that they're actually different. I think for a long time I would have argued that they're the same, that the evidence is, well, this is what I think, this is my thought about this situation, therefore that is the evidence, that is the truth.
Mm.
Right? And I think we know and we meet a lot of people who go through their lives with their evidence being their thought patterns and not recognizing that there's anything different about the two. And yet, it's not hard to help people look at evidence from the perspective of examples in their own life of a time when they've been able to change their mind about something that they once held a very strong thought pattern about, and then were able to see something completely different with some new information provided. Right. And I think that's, when I think about coaching and supporting people, I think it's not about trying to convince them that their thoughts are not, the evidence or the facts. It's pointing them at examples from their own life when would have been 100% convinced that their thought was the evidence and was the truth, and then were able to quickly change that with some new information. And I think your story from the hike is a really powerful one, because it also kind of shows us how powerful the stories that other people have and the ways that other people see the world can then influence our own thought patterns. And it's often really helpful to think about, like, how many of these beliefs that I have, and belief being just a thought that we've not challenged for a long time, how many of those are our own thought patterns? How many of them actually did we choose to believe or allow to continue? Or how many of them were somebody else's that we've just sort of adopted as our own? And so, I think it's interesting that you were kind of put in a situation where somebody else's thoughts or beliefs about what's safe and what's not safe started as your belief pattern as going into the hike, but then based on kind of not having a choice, you allowed yourself to prove or disprove that belief, that thought pattern, by doing exactly the opposite of what you were told to do. And I think this is one where ultimately what's at the root of this tool is the idea that one of the most helpful things we can do through our life is to challenge our own thought patterns and our own beliefs regularly, right? Not assume that everything we've believed up until this point in our life is true, but to actually wonder, where is this coming from, and why do I believe this, and is this serving me anymore to have this belief pattern? And I think what the hike did for you in many, many, many different ways was to disprove beliefs you had about your own capabilities and your own capacity, which has since unlocked so much more potential for you to experience your own potential and your own capacity and your own abilities, in ways that probably wouldn't have seemed believable before the hike.
Mm. Yeah, I feel all of that. I mean, I really loved when you were saying about, because I think a lot of times people will say, well, you can't choose your beliefs, like they're here. And what you just said was, am I consciously choosing something that to see, is it serving me anymore? Or am I really having the awareness to look at it and see if it's serving me anymore? And the other thing that I thought was interesting was, because I'm sure, well, I would be curious in your own life, in the before times, perhaps when you were not as aware as you are now. Um, is there something that you can remember, like where a belief shifted for you? I don't know, like, I guess I'm thinking about, maybe I'll just leave it at that. Yeah. Like, is there something that not necessarily the enlightenment moment, but more something that you were just like, oh, well, boy, that can't be that way, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, definitely, I think going through, big, sort of big traumatic, what seemed like traumatic times of my life, there were many, many moments where blame that I had assigned to somebody, for how I was feeling, was based on what I had convinced myself was the evidence, right? But I, later, through, good fortune or just happenstance, would learn new information, and that new information would all of a sudden kind of disprove the intent that I had assigned to that other person. And then I would feel stuck. It was like, well, I can't continue to believe that. Like, that feeling I was having is no longer, I can't attribute it to that person anymore. So I need to have a new belief. I need to write, we've talked about like writing a new script about that part of my beliefs, and how I had, assigned blame for certain things, or attributed things to other people or circumstances, and so, like, it was just a series for me. My experience was a series of experiences that were disproving the way I was rationalizing what was going on in my life, and then kind of getting to a point where I was like, okay, well, maybe actually, and this also coincided with an invitation from a book I was reading to take more personal responsibility for your own way of feeling. And those two things sort of collided at the same time. There was like holes in the story, holes in the script that I had been carrying around with me. And then this invitation saying, take full responsibility for the entire script. And those two things happening at the same time were like, and kind of like, as you said, like an awakening to, okay, well, maybe I'm making all of it up, and maybe I can actually choose more of it for myself, instead of feeling like, because I didn't like the way a lot of it felt. I didn't like the way blaming other people felt, because it was me that was hurting in doing that. Like I was causing me more pain to blame somebody else for something. And so it was sort of those two things together, right? Is that I had made up stories that felt like evidence and then had them disproved, and then eventually realized that so many of them were being disproved that maybe I didn't have such a strong script to start with.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I needed to think about how I wanted to feel, how I wanted to be, how I wanted to show up in the world, and rewrite that script from scratch for myself.
Mm.
So yeah, I mean, I think this is one that shows up regularly in most of our lives, is catching ourselves in this very subtle difference between what seems real in terms of like evidence and what's actually manufactured to protect ourselves in some way. And often, you know, there isn't a lot of basis for these things.
Mm.
So at least that's been my experience, and getting to the other side of that and realizing that, you know, everything that happens through the day is a choice on how I respond to it and how I whether I attribute anything to it or just realize that it's just what's happening around me, and I can just sort of live in this sort of peaceful cone of, you know, observation. And that's my goal every day, is honestly to try to live in that, like that sort of peaceful, you know, zone of observation. And every once in a while you get caught up by things.
Mm-hmm.
So, which is great. And I think it's funny because the original tool we were going to talk about is so aligned to this, because when you notice that you get caught up in things that don't feel like great or not the way you want, feel like negative, it's like a little warning sign on your dashboard that says there's still something to investigate around this thing, this topic, or this person, or this situation still has some little triggers that maybe you hadn't uncovered yet. And that's great, because if you can actually look at those and see them for what they are, then you can, you know, navigate through them much better the next time those things happen.
It's funny because I was thinking as you were talking about an episode of this show that I record, this show being Art, Creativity, and Wellbeing. This is a series within that. With a coach. She's like a neurodiversity coach named Elaine Taylor Klaus. And she tells this story about how there came a point where she herself had to acknowledge that all of the neurodivergence among their 5 children couldn't all be her husband's fault. That's basically how she said it.
Sure, David appreciated hearing that.
I'm sure he did. But like, because I think what you were speaking to is these are things that are our identities, and like, what does it mean if I can't be that like, what if I'm the person with the neurodiversity that my children have inherited? You know what I mean? Like, what does that say about me? It seems like something that could be at the heart of this for people. Like,
yeah, I think that the idea of having to examine ourselves and the script that we've held tightly to in our life is one of the scariest things that humans face. You know, that having to, you and I have watched this video together of a man kind of going through his life with this sort of blaming his mother's alcoholism and everything for his life experience, until he all of a sudden is like invited to look a different direction at what he was doing to facilitate the suffering that he was part of. not to blame him for it, but that how he was a co-conspirator in it with his mother.
Mm-hmm.
And what was it? What I love about that video was his reaction was this utter, I mean, he laughed in this beautifully deep
Mm-hmm.
and like profound laugh at the whole notion that he has gone through his life, and he's probably a middle 45, 50-year-old man at this point, carrying this script of blame for something that he could now see the evidence was he was part of. And he could no longer just assign the blame to his mother. He would have to write a new script.
Mm-hmm.
And it was almost, it felt like it was a joyful release, but it's one that you know, a lot of people would be really challenged to confront that, because that means, like, who am I? Like, am I responsible for how I've shown up to this point in my life? And the answer is yes, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
as much as we would like it to be somebody else's fault if it's not exactly the way we want it. The answer is yes, it's your responsibility. And but that's confronting for people. And I
Mm-hmm.
think watching him go through that with the support of a very trusted and expert support person was, you know, a great reminder that so many of us carry that script. And I loved his language around it. It's like, I'll have to write a new script.
Mm-hmm.
He was so aware of his own story that
Yeah.
he could even see and how to speak about what would need to happen next, to use those words, right? Like, he recognized that his story to that point would have to be redone. And that is what we're talking about. Like, the evidence that he went into that conversation with was all about what his mother had done to him. That was
Mm-hmm.
the whole script was based on being on the receiving end of something. And all it took was some support to see it from a new angle, to see that, to disprove some of that enough to the point where, oh boy, the whole thing is gonna fall now because the foundation isn't there anymore.
Mm-hmm. My sense in watching it has been a little bit of time, but I remember first, like, just it's interesting that you say that you're confronting something about yourself, and there was some resistance there for him. I believe there were tears. He was like,
Mm-hmm.
how, this is how it was, kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I remember him that wonderful laughter that you described when he was saying it's just silly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that felt like almost relief
Oh yeah.
of like, oh wow, this makes so much
Mm-hmm.
sense. And there's real empowerment in that. Like, certainly in that situation, and that does make me curious about a wider situation of, or a wider, if we look at this tool from a wider angle, is like, what are the positive, what are the, I don't know, what happens, I don't even want to say positive, but like, when we are believing our thoughts, what are the feelings around that? And then when we're seeing the evidence for what it is, and I don't want to say believing that, but like trusting it. What are our feelings like? Is there a shift there? That might be a little
Mm-hmm.
esoteric. We'll see.
Can you ask the question in a, like, in a practical, like in a more practical
Like a
way?
situation.
Mm.
Yeah. So actually, I'll share a story. So I did do this hike. I We were just talking before we hit record about how at first, the first days of the hike, I would get to the point where I'd eaten my breakfast, I'd done my stretches, I'd packed up the bag that was going to be taken to the next inn. That was where it was supposed to be, and now it was just time to put on my pack and walk out the door. And I was like, the feeling of not having, I don't know, paperwork to fill out or something. Like, I was just going to walk out the door and get on a path. Like, what? It was really uh was some learning there, and I'm taking that into my life now. Where so my husband and I are relocating to Maine, and it's been really interesting exploring in the very rural places that we are, that call to us, and yet there can still be these, I think it's really interesting because there can be these messages of, oh, I don't know, it was said to me over the weekend when we were up looking at a property, a very, very remote property. Someone that I was with on that little expedition or journey said that they hide from the ATV riders that they see. That they'll hear them coming and they'll hide because they don't know, are they drug dealers? Like what's the deal with them? And I've learned on my own, like I've had my own path of sort of a place near me that I really, really love to go and visit is also utilized by off-road like bikes. So motorbikes that are,
Mhm.
you know, not for the road, but for the sand. And I had all these worries about who those people were and everything like that. And I understood for myself that they're just really nice people who enjoy riding around on bikes, right? And I could hear this person up in Maine basically saying what I had been believing, but have since learned to not be true. And then I could hear in my own head a little bit of a creeping in of like, oh, but, what if it's different up here? What if they were like, and yet the evidence every single time I ran into an ATVer was amazing. Like they're just people. So if I think about what I was curious about was that there are some feelings when I'm believing a story versus some feelings when I'm trusting the evidence. And you know, I have words around that, like, for example, disempowering or victim, and then feeling empowered or feeling like I have permission or feeling open and curious and loving
Mhm.
with the trusting the evidence. Um, they're very different in that way. The feeling states are very different.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what you're getting to, and like the heart of what you're getting at, is almost like, how do we know the difference between a feeling that's true or a feeling that's made up?
Mm, mm,
And that is a super interesting question, because it really gets to the heart of what, if I'm going to try to figure out how to say this without too much woo woo. But if we believe that sort of within us there is a source of feeling that is based on our true sort of human uh, being as a human, right? Our true um, capacity as a human being. Um, if we eliminated, or no, let me say that again. If we came from that place, there would be no reason to have a negative feeling towards other people, other situations, the environment around us, because as my understanding from living life so far is that when we come from that place, we come from a place of positive um, energy towards others, but also towards our ability to respond to the events that are happening around us with some grace and with some patience and with some understanding. Um, so we know sort of, I think inherently, if when we tune into this, we know when we're coming from that kind of energy versus coming from an energy of distrust or dis-ease, or you
mm,
know not believing that we can respond to the circumstances or the environment around us. Those are that's a It is definitely a different feeling energy, but it's more that it's coming from a source um of not feeling that we are within the control, that we have the control over our environment and our response to our environment, and a sort of an empathy and love and appreciation for other people. Like there's just a different sense of, is this something that's created by fear and by sort of the opposite of empowerment, or is it coming from a place that's truly just, at peace, that I've got everything I need to deal with whatever might happen. And I think that's something that we all have to figure that out for ourselves, like what that feels like. And I think naturally, some people, depending on what they've been through in their life, the path to get to that fully empowered place might just be a longer, less direct path than somebody who's been in a empowered state for most of their life, right? Like we all have a different journey, but I spoke about this yesterday on a call that, we've done some, I've done some work, and the program that the Insight Alliance, where they work with people in the criminal justice system. And so, these are young people or middle-aged people who've spent a lot of their lives, if not all of their lives, in a state of negative energy, negative emotion, negative feeling. There hasn't been nurturing to even oftentimes expose them to anything different from that. And yet, in the matter of a few weeks of training and introducing them to a different way to understand how much of their experience of life is as a result of the thinking they have about what's happening, just cracking that door open a little bit, you see that there is actually this beautiful human being that has the ability for empathy and for love and for trust and for care. It's there, and it's almost inexplicable that it's there given the lack of nurturing. To me, we talk about evidence versus thought patterns. To me, that's evidence of what our true human nature is. Somebody who has been through the most horrific, 30 years of life experience you could craft, still has in them something that is so beautiful, is just stunning. And that's just kind of, I point to that for my own evidence that it's in all of us. And if we can take the layers away and understand how we've ended up, with gaps in showing up that way all the time, once we can understand that that's come from our life experience, but that it doesn't define us, then we can start writing that new script and start creating new evidence of who we can be. So that was a very long answer to the question, but I think it is a journey for everybody to find that sense of human, what it is to be a human, that is responsible for their experience of life. And what does that feel like? Without expecting that your external environment and the people around you and anything else has anything to do with it. That's the journey, I suppose.
It's like, forget everything you ever learned and just see what's left.
Unfortunately, and there's a reason for that. I mean, there's a reason that, society has been crafted in such a way that certain people figured out that they could control how other people behaved by, interacting with them in certain ways. And those then become unchallenged thought patterns that become beliefs that that's just the way it is, right? That's just the way I'm meant to feel. I mean, we did some stuff on your hike, which was fun for me on the outside, because I knew what I was doing, but I didn't want to tell you why we were doing what we were doing. And one of the ones was being playful with the speed that you walked at, right?
Yes. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah.
Yeah, because I suspect you went into the hike with a sort of predetermined threshold of how far it was possible for you to walk in a day, just
Mm,
based on your walking speed. Like, not even fitness, not anything else, but just based on my training, this is how fast I can walk. Therefore, I can walk 5 miles maximum in a day, or whatever the number was.
mhm.
And so we played this game where I was just getting you to be playful with speed, and, speed up for a little while and slow down, and just not have a formula to it, but just kind of see what happened. Right.
Mm.
And all of a sudden your days got longer and longer and longer. I think you're what, 14, 15 miles by the end?
15.8 miles was my
15.
was my
Yeah.
longest day.
Right.
Yeah.
And nothing changed except the evidence got rewritten every few
Mm.
days, because like a new record would be set, and but it wasn't. You were getting, your feet were tired, your feet were all beaten up, you were tired, right? Like, it wasn't fitness all of a sudden kicking in as much as it was you took the limiter off of yourself and just allowed what was truly possible to happen. And that's
Mhm.
a great example of just sort of this whole topic of evidence versus thought patterns. Is like, the evidence we eventually found out was that you can walk 15 or 16 miles in a day.
Yep.
And the thought pattern would have limited you to 5 or 6 or 7.
So I love that this is something I've always wanted to ask you about, because we've never spoken about it other than
Mm.
in a messaging, situation. Um, so the experience of that was, it's nothing that you need to, like, don't do it for a set amount of time, just playfully speed up and then ease back. And you even gave motivation. You said something like, your natural pace will feel so much more relaxed
Mhm.
after you do that. That's why I did it. And then the invitation to do it, you don't have to do it for a set amount of time, just do it until you're done doing it. Like, I was on my walk this morning speeding up and slowing down,
Mm.
because it ended up having other benefits that I were completely unanticipated. But what was there in your background, I guess, that caused you? Because you said something just a moment ago, like, I knew why I was doing this. Like,
Mm.
what was it? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, I coached sports for a long time early in my career. So, I've seen how people's thought patterns around pacing can often get in the way of what they're capable of. That's one part. But there's a more psychological side of this that I've experienced for myself, which is, I used to um, um, have the motivation to go jogging, or be a runner, let's call it. And I would always find myself um, running too fast, and in terms of my pacing, and not learn, and eventually not enjoying the experience of, like, hurting as bad as it hurt, or
Mm.
or and so my experience of running became one that wasn't really that much fun anymore. So I experimented with this, and I kind of took a break for a while, and then when I came back to it, I said, well, I'm going to start by just getting out and walking. And if walking eventually feels like boring or not much fun anymore, I'm going to allow myself to run until I don't feel like running, and then I'll go back to walking. And it was just sort of like, it became a walk to a walk jog, to a walk run. And then eventually I would find myself running for like an hour and a half. And then,
Wow.
before, but it never felt forced anymore. It just felt playful. And um, along the way, I also noticed that my fitness would just naturally kind of evolve without needing to structure it or plan it or be super specific about it. And I just, my sense was that you were, with what you were going through, was that we had to somehow bring some joy to the experience. And, if you ever run on a treadmill, um, and you kind of do these alternating, going from walking to more intense running back and forth, you'll notice it for yourself that the walking speed eventually feels so pedestrian. It's
Mhm.
it's incredible, even though it's exactly the same as it was when you started. The differentiation between the running and the walking creates this shift in what it feels like in your mind. But if I think back to that moment when I suggested it to, I think most of it came from a sense of just me being curious if the limits you had set for what your pace was and how far you could go in a day, to test that
Mhm.
theory, and without forcing you to try to push yourself and not enjoy it. I thought, well, I know how to playfully do this from my own experiences. And let's see if this is helpful. So it wasn't some deep Freudian psychology going on, but it was very much tied into this topic that we're talking about today. Is you would have been convinced if I had tried to say, well, I think, Kay, we could probably go, 1 mile an hour faster. You would have been quite right to say, well, based on the evidence of all the training I've done so far,
Mhm.
that's not possible. I have walked hundreds and hundreds of miles in training, and this is how fast I can walk.
Yep. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So we had to distract you from that conversation and have one that was, and to be honest, you also have to know your client a little bit, and to offer you something that is playful, unstructured, you know, um, is more in tune with who you are than it might be for somebody else who might say, no, I'd rather you tell me what to do differently.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yep.
part of it was also that, you were the right person to receive that message, and to receive it in the spirit that it was offered.
Yeah. Wow. Uh, I feel that. I'm really glad to have sort of a better understanding of where, the setting in which uh you asked that question or you thought about it. And super cool. I'm curious if you've got any final thoughts on trusting evidence over thoughts.
Well, we usually give people some homework. So I think that the
Mm,
homework that would come out of this one is really just an invitation to, anytime you are feeling an emotion that isn't really feeling like it's one that is your, um, not your not your familiar state, but if you could see yourself as this beautiful human being, inside many layers of life experience, but in there's this beautiful human being that is trustworthy of themselves, of others, of their ability to respond to the world as it unfolds in a kind and mindful way. Um, if you could believe that about yourself, that's person is inside you, and that any feeling that isn't coming from that kind of space is an invitation to explore, do I actually have the evidence to prove to myself that the things that I'm thinking that are creating this feeling I'm having right now are really true, and are really serving me in a positive way. Because if I could let go of those things and not feel this feeling anymore, um, I could be closer to that version of me inside there, um, that I aspire to learn more about. And so
mm,
that would be the big thing. You hear people talk about forgiveness a lot, and I think forgiveness is such an interesting thing because carried through our life as this idea that we're forgiving somebody else, like we're giving them the ability to be off the hook, so to speak. But it's really not that. It's we're getting to be off the hook of carrying the weight of
Mm.
holding on to that feeling any longer. And I think that's, so much of what we're carrying around are negative emotions that who knows how they came to be, but we think that we're protecting ourselves by holding on to all of these things, but we're just building more and more layers of crap over top of this like beautiful human being that's in
Mm.
there. So that would be the invitation, is to just explore, explore the things that cause you to feel negative or unhelpful emotions in your life, and yeah, be curious about them and be curious what it would be like to not hold those anymore and to
Mm.
let them go and to rewrite those scripts and or just throw them in the fire pit in the backyard and let let them go.
Mhm. Mm. Beautiful. And I think the invitation that I would add would be to, it's super related, like, is to see if you can understand the difference in feelings. Like, I love that, where this conversation has kind of gone to is that, like, we've got these intuitive feelings inside, and we've got other things that have come in from the outside. So when I'm experiencing a feeling, where is it coming from? Is it intuition? Is it like, is it heart? Is it gut? Is it brain?
Mm.
And just sort of noticing. Um, maybe that's a precursor to yours, Andrew, because then it's like, okay, now I can be curious about this and see where that goes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Another great conversation. I love these. I'm glad we're doing them.
Me too. Yeah, it's been fun. So we have two more.
I believe we have two more.
Wow.
I know it's gone quickly.
Yeah.
Gone very fast.
Awesome. Well, I hope they're helpful for people that watch, and yeah, and I don't know if we've gotten any questions or any comments from them, but maybe, yeah, if people do have questions or feedback, it would be fun to talk about. Yeah, talk about those in an episode, or maybe we'll add one bonus episode at the end to invite, maybe even invite people onto the call with us and
Oh,
who've
that'd be
followed
cool.
along, and that would be fun
Yeah.
to answer questions and talk about the tools with others.
Oh, I love that idea. Oh, so if you are watching or listening, um, yeah, think about that,
That
because
would
that would
be
be
October-ish,
that'll
perhaps.
be Octoberish. How wild. Yeah. Um, our October tools conversation is a bonus one where we can be in conversation perhaps with listeners,
Mhm.
viewers. Very cool. I love it. All right. Thank you for watching and listening, and we will see you again for our next one. Bye-bye.